Welcome back to another episode of the Spirituality Out Loud podcast. I'm Leslie Seidel, and I can't wait to dive into today's interview. Today we have Peter Rubin. He is known as Your Business Midwife. He guides his clients on authentic journeys of inner growth, the creation of visionary businesses that stand out in the marketplace, contribute to communities, and generate a healthy profit. Coaches, spiritual healers, sexuality teachers, social justice activists, and other visionary leaders turn to Peter for compassionate, brilliant guidance that unites strategy and soul. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. How are you?
That my bio changes all the time as I
Yeah.
change.
Totally.
So when we had our podcast scheduled and you asked for a bio, I couldn't find my normal one, so I just wrote that.
Oh, nice.
The new strategy and soul came out, so I'm glad you like that.
I love that. It just, it's what's needed, in my opinion, in the world, right? One of the reasons we're doing the podcast is to really have this conversation more and more and more and more with people and to attend to our soul in that way. I went to a graduate school at a place called Pacifica, and their theme is attending to the soul of the world.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Right?
I love that.
Yeah. So we like to begin at the beginning, Peter. And so what that means is I would love for you to share with us what your spiritual life was like growing up, if you had an organized one, if you didn't, kind of how you felt about that, and what was your experience?
Yeah. Well, I listened to your interview earlier, so we have some things in common. One of which is I didn't really have a spiritual life growing up. Spirituality wasn't really talked about in my family. My dad is Jewish. My mom is Christian, and more, I don't know what brand of Christianity. I'd call it more humanist Christianity, where it's more about the values of love and caring and connection, and less about religiosity and dogma. So I grew up in a household where we celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah. And when I was a kid, it was more about the presents and the family time, and being together with family. But I never got bar mitzvahed. Maybe I went to church or temple a few times on the Jewish high holidays or, Christmas or Easter. But it wasn't a regular part of my life, and I wasn't really drawn to it. It wasn't pushed on me. It wasn't something I was seeking at all. And didn't really have a spiritual life until my 20s. It wasn't until I was honestly a depressed grad student at Stanford studying mechanical engineering, stuck in a lab building robots, and coming home and just feeling miserable, and got to this place where I'd been a valedictorian of my high school, high achiever at Stanford, and hit this limit of like how much achievement could hit the dopamine buttons that had me feel good. And I had a really depressed year. And somehow in there, I heard about two books. One was John Kabat-Zinn's Wherever You Go, There You Are. For those who don't know him, he's an amazing mindfulness teacher who combines sort of the medical world and mindfulness in Massachusetts. And then the other book was Thich Nhat Hanh's Peace is Every Step. So I have it on my shelf all earmarked, and pages are yellowed, and those two books just turned me on to Buddhist practice and meditation, and I just soaked it up like a dry sponge. I didn't even know that I was this dry sponge for spirituality until I read these books, and I just loved it. And I would sit in my backyard on a couch cushion. I didn't have enough height under my hips, so my back was killing me. And no one was there to tell me that it didn't have to be that way. So I just sit there, my back was killing me. And I'm like, okay, mindfulness of this, mindfulness of that. I loved it. I just loved being present and having some sense of connection to my own inner world. That was really new for me.
So you were depressed, you're at Stanford, and somehow these books came to being in your world. Do you remember how they...
Along with a mentor. Actually, more important than the books was this mentor, Julian Gorodsky, who I don't know where I'd be without him. He was my first, I guess you'd call him a spiritual mentor, but he was in his 70s. I was 21, 22, and we met at the design school. And I was having issues with my team and came to him, and within 10 minutes I broke down in tears, and he was there to support me. And his role was to support faculty and students with their team dynamics. And he had 40 years of experience as a shrink in Silicon Valley, working with burnt out startup, founders and executives. So he was someone like I'd never met before, deeply steeped in his own inner world. He knew Jack Kornfield and was friends with some of those original Bay Area meditators. So he introduced me to meditation. He probably told me about those books. I imagine it was him.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was a mentorship. Like I was just so grateful for that. And we taught together for 6 years and went, got real with each other. It was an incredible connection.
Yeah, because when you talk about sitting, by yourself and trying to be mindful, and I lived in the Bay Area for a while, and so I know how rich the area is with mindfulness and with Buddhist practice, and all, you can go to Spirit Rock anytime you want, and there's all of these places, and so it's so lovely. It's so lovely that your school had this piece, right? So they had someone to attend to that side of you, like group dynamics.
Yeah, and this was not Stanford as a whole. This was one sort of strange subculture within the school that had this experimental role. And I was, lucky enough, or fate have it, that the two of us crossed paths.
Yeah. So when you worked with him, was it under the guise of a business mentor or a teaching mentor, or was there a piece about was there an overt piece about spirituality?
There actually was. We were, first of all, just being friends and getting some mentorship from him. And then he was teaching a class on team dynamics, and he invited me to co-teach with him. So again, this radical intergenerational collaboration that we were doing, where he listened to me like I knew something. I had no, I was 21. I had no idea, but he really empowered me to, teach and share what I was learning. So we guide our students, again, many of whom are older than me, who are in grad school or beyond. We'd lead them through meditation, through walking meditation, talking about creative flow. We at one point had everyone make their own musical instruments and had this, what was it? It was someone Xander. There was a TED talk on how to lead like the great conductors. Bill Xander, I think his name is. And we had the students watch that TED talk and then create their own instruments and play together and get into that collaborative flow.
Wow.
So we did some really cool stuff that combined creativity and spirituality and design. I mean, it was a really awesome course that we got to create.
And also just incredibly beautiful to have someone, and it's a good reminder for me to go back to the beginner's mind and know the value of that, right? To hear people who are just coming into the work and just coming into a spiritual life and their newness, their freshness, right? And what value that has for someone who's been doing it for so long, that I can be blinded by some of the work. Right?
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah. As you say that, I imagine that's a lot of what he gained from our friendship, is that, wide-eyed innocence as I'm learning this world from him.
Yeah. So now you have an awakening, kind of. I mean, is that how you would say it?
Yeah. I was thinking a little bit before this interview about that idea of awakening. Did I have an awakening? And I look back and I probably more had like a half dozen, mini awakenings, right? Maybe more even, right? But these little awakenings where some part of me that was asleep wakes up and I'm able to see a little bit deeper into myself, or a new realm, or something comes online that was numbed out or shut down. And this was I would say that is the first awakening, having that mentor, inviting that mentor in.
Yeah, the 12-step program describes, instead of this burning bush, right? Like you're turn around one day and you're just a believer in some sense. of this educational variety, which I think is really more people's experience, at least absolutely mine, of just they talk about the mustard seed, right? Just enough belief that maybe there's something over here. And slowly over time, I can look back and see all of these several awakenings, right? I really like the idea of this part of you coming online and that part of you coming online as you walk forward.
Yeah. And I think of Jack Kornfield's book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, right?
Oh
Awakening's a fun thing to talk about later, but then you have the awakening and you're like, oh no, like I have this part of me that's now, awake to the suffering in myself, the suffering in the world. And now I can't do, my old job the old way, or, can't do relationship the way I have been.
yeah.
And that's where the work is, right? It's between the awakenings that we have to make ourselves useful and available.
Chop wood, carry water.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened next?
What happened next? I did my first retreat. You mentioned Spirit Rock.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very special place for me. I did my first 5-day silent retreat, residential retreat.
Wow.
And I remember day 4 of that retreat doing some walking meditation, having gone through all sorts of inner hell.
Totally.
And a really great peace washing over me, and tears. And having this first sense of myself not being my outsides, not being the job, the Stanford education, all of that, of really feeling my inner self. I don't think I had a language of soul or really think about it that way or thought about it that way. But I was just walking and crying and feeling the simplicity of who I am and the love, that metta feeling of loving kindness towards myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was my first major awakening. Like that turned my whole life around, where I was in a job as a design consultant, working for, some pretty big companies, creating innovation strategies and such. And then just coming back to that and being like, I don't know if this is purposeful. Like, I don't know if this is the direction I want to be going. And that's really what got me more deeply rooted in my own inner personal growth, spiritual path thing. And I didn't really have language for it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I started following something in me that didn't match what I'd been told or set up to do in my life. And I remember one of the teachers of that retreat used the metaphor of a ship and the rudder. You have an experience like that, and the rudder turns, and your ship doesn't turn around right away, but it starts this long arc. And since that first major awakening, my life has turned, right? That brought me to coaching. It brought me to my spiritual path. It brought me, to all sorts of things that I see in my life fully rooted and established now that were just seeding back then.
Yeah. Beautiful. Were you, was it scary?
Good question. I don't think that's the first word I would use. I'm a very curious person. Right? I find my curiosity gets me into things, and then my courage gets me out of it. Right. So there is some realm of anxiety and fear. Like that's a common experience in my life, but not like one big scary thing, more like going through some turbulence. We're just showing up and finding myself in life, for phases can be really challenging.
That's really beautiful. I love that. I love the idea that, your curiosity gets you in trouble and your courage gets you out is words for something I've experienced many times in my life. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. But I will say what was scary, you reminded me, the actual step of leaving that job. I stayed another year after that meditation retreat. Mm-hmm. And I remember being on that precipice of, I was in a coaching certification. I had 7 clients on nights and weekends, charging not a lot of money. So it was a leap of faith to say, hey, I love this coaching thing. The design thing's not speaking to me the same way anymore. And I remember one of my bosses, I had three partners at this firm. I was the first employee, and one of my bosses said, hey, we have a big project coming up. We'd like you to lead it. Are you going to rock the project? Because my performance was a little shaky at this point. My soul was challenging me. It was a rhetorical question, but I said, you know what? I got to sleep on it. so I had 12 hours essentially to decide whether or not I was in or out.
Yeah.
Talked to all my friends and family. Half of them said, "You're crazy to leave this job. This is your career. Your whole life is designed for that. Like, you're here, you've made it. What are you doing?"
Mm.
And the other half of my friends say, "Go, Peter, like, take the leap. You got this. Trust yourself." It was an even split.
Mm. And back on you.
Yeah, back on me. And I just like couldn't sleep that night. I came back and I made the decision to leave that job. And that same boss, who I thought would be most critical or harsh, he said, "You know what? I've never regretted," he said, "good for you. I've never regretted leaving a job in my life.
Wow.
Such blessings on your journey." And he said, "If you want to come back and consult with us, you're more than welcome to."
You couldn't have asked for a better
Yeah,
response.
it was so great. I mean, these guys have been so generous and gracious with me,
Mm.
you know.
Oh.
And I ended up consulting for this firm for the next 2 years or so, part-time.
Mm-hmm.
And without that, I could not have established myself as a coach.
Yeah.
So it was incredible. So I had my freedom, got to pursue my passion, got to do work, from a different role. It was really a huge gift.
Well, and I just love how you took that leap, right? Like you, and I have this image of, there's a movie, what is it? Indiana Jones, and he's got to do this step and the leap of faith, right? He does not see it. It's just a cavern. And you did that.
Mm-hmm.
And you just got carried. And so many times over and over again, I have to take these leaps of faith that are so terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's lovely to see, to look back and see how it showed up for you. So good for you. It's a really huge accomplishment in my world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. After that, my coaching brand was called Masters of the Leap. Soon
There
after
you
that.
go. Yeah,
So
nice.
that's funny how us coaches, we always teach what we learned a year or two ago, right?
The wounded healer. There's
Yeah.
nothing better, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it works.
Yeah.
So what year was this? When was this?
So this was 2010, 11, sort of in there, winter
Okay.
of 2010. And I think I'll share a parallel story of what was happening alongside the professional track that I've been sharing.
Yeah.
Is that I was in San Francisco. Again, like, this is another sort of, it's funny how my phases of depression are sort of the ones right before the leap. I guess it is for everyone. But
Yes.
some of this flavor of depression was like, wow, I have a job. It's winter. I'm biking to work in the dark. I'm biking home in the dark. And I was lonely. I was having a hard time out of college really making relationships, and especially romantic ones. And I dated a whole series of unavailable women, including one woman who told me she was gay the first moment we met, and somehow I didn't hear that or didn't get it. And then ended up having this like beautiful yet excruciatingly unavailable connection with her.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, after a few of these flavors of relationship like that, I'm like, okay, this is not you, this is me. What's going on here? And at the time, I was in a meditation group, which was really, that thread I told you about, being on the cushion myself, like that was being well fed in community.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about like spirituality and relationship, spirituality and sexuality that wasn't being filled or touched at all in my sitting practice. So I heard about this organization called One Taste. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Mm-mm.
They're based in San Francisco. They're now all over the world, and they teach about relationship and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And I was both drawn and terrified to go to that sort of workshop. And went to a workshop, and they teach a practice called orgasmic meditation. And it's a mindful sexuality practice. So just like sitting is a practice for your mind and heart, and yoga is a practice for your body, this is sort of like yoga for your sexuality. And basically the way it works is it's between a woman and someone with a finger, and she will lie down and take her clothes off from the waist down. Mm-hmm. And the person called the stroker, man, or it could be a woman, will sit in a certain position and mindfully stroke her clitoris for 15 minutes. So I heard of this. I'm like, this is weird. And yet, as you can probably tell by now, I'm down to try anything once. So I went to this weekend workshop, learn the practice, and there's a very specific container around it. So you don't have to be romantically involved. You don't have to even know who your partner is. You could be, you could be doing it in a monogamous way with a committed partner, but you don't need to. So I was at this workshop and scared half to death and learning about this practice and some of the philosophy around it. And ended up having my first oming experience, orgasmic meditation, with this woman, Fifi from Hawaii, who I hadn't met before. And here I am, stroking her genitals. My shoulders were like up to my ears. I was so stressed out by this whole thing. And weird as it was, there was something in me that really clicked with this practice. And I was like, oh my God, I've been trying to do this all the time in relationships, to actually be mindful and not try to get anywhere with an agenda, not trying to get her off, not trying to any of that, but just being present with a sensation of pleasure in my body and tuning into her and feeling that resonance with her. So in that moment, I found what became my next practice, more so than sitting meditation, and ended up spending the next 3 or 4 years pretty deeply practicing orgasmic meditation with a number of partners. And in it, learning that a lot of my conditioning as a man to sort of armor up and be in my head, a lot of that was melted away through this relational practice. So every day I'd go to a center and om with people, and it worked through a whole lot of shame and sort of barriers to feeling. So it was a huge part of my journey.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, obviously. So I have a lot of questions, I guess, about the practice, because what I hear you saying is this was a really intense spiritual practice for you. And it's called what? Orgasmic meditation?
Orgasmic meditation.
Yeah. Does that mean that the goal was to orgasm?
No, when they talk about orgasm, they have a different definition than our sort of conventional one.
Okay.
They would call that climax, that moment of like going over an edge.
Yeah.
Like fireworks, that's climax.
Okay.
And then orgasm, they refer to as a feeling of pleasure in the body.
Okay.
So as the one stroking and the one being stroked, the goal is the same, and that goal is simply to feel. Right? So there may or may not be a climax in those 15 minutes of practice, and that's not the point.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it might feel, hot and sort of,
even tense.
Beastly feel. It might feel very sexual. It might be more of like, like the angels are singing. Like there are a bunch of different sort of flavors that come out in the practice, like sitting meditation.
Right? But even when you said the first time, you were tense.
Yeah.
Which is fine, right? Like it looks like when I meditate, it looks like I'm serene and peaceful, when that's not what I'm experiencing. A lot of times I can be totally crazy and like, oh my God, as I sit in this thing. So the woman is always the receiver, never the man.
That's the way the practice is set up for the most part. A lot of that is culturally, women are conditioned to please men, right? So a lot of it is culturally set up so men have the experience of having their attention on someone else, and women have the chance to receive. There is a male stroking practice as well, but that's often introduced later. Just to flip the cultural script more than anything. Interesting. Yeah.
So your mindfulness, you now have merged mindfulness and sexuality. But the practice is not about relationship. I mean, it is, right? But not the actual physicality that you said. Like it can have relationship or it cannot have relationship between the two people.
Right.
So how did that, or did it start to affect your relationship? Because part of what you said was that you were missing spirituality and relationship. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So it's not, how do I say it? The practice itself is sort of neutral and that it can be applied in any sort of relationship, meaning you don't need to be married to ohm, right? Like there's something beautiful about just meeting someone who you feel safe with because they know the practice and the, the communication structure around it. And they're safe enough to surrender into this practice with you. And then you don't owe each other anything. You don't have to have tea after. You don't have to be Facebook friends. But you're just there for the experience itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But everyone's a willing participant. It comes
yeah, it's
to
all, between consenting adults, and you get to have the experience itself. Like that can be very liberating. And some people use ohming that way. Mm-hmm. Other people are in committed monogamous relationships and they ohm with their partners. And it's a way to, connect in their busy world in the morning before work or at night or whatever. Just to have a chance where it's not sex, right? It's a practice space, but just a way to drop in and sync up with each other.
So I have never heard about this. So
yeah, cool.
I would love to hear, I would love to hear how this part of your journey or this next, spiritual practice changed you, if it did.
Yeah, it did immensely. So I'm not really an ohmer anymore. I haven't ohmed in a few years at least. So it's not one of my main practices, but it definitely changed me profoundly forever. Meaning that before ohming, I was coming a lot from my head, like pros and cons lists of things. And with women, it was a lot about charming and like, how do I say the right thing? And all this mental garbage, honestly, that was getting in the way of what I really wanted, which was what I learned through ohming as a reference, is like how to relate from feeling, like what actually feels good in this moment. So in the language of ohming, what is the resonant stroke, right? Is it light? Is it heavy? Is it, right? So the way I move through the world now is way more feeling based, like, oh, what feels good in my communication, in my coaching, in my romantic connection.
So is it about the body? Is it about an emotion or both?
Both. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very integrated practice. Right. So it helped connect some things that were disconnected for me. Like Absolutely. It connected my genitals and my heart, right? My sex drive and my love in a way that for me and a ton of men, especially women as well, but especially men, like those energies can be really disconnected. You either want to have sex with someone or you can love them. Right. And like those two got deeply integrated for me. And my brain in a more of a backseat, like, okay, brain, you can help, but you don't have to run the entire show.
Yeah. So. I love that, I do believe that spirituality is about integration. And that's what I hear you talking about, right? About having the whole person, having this be about all these different areas, all these different parts of you. And so, okay, so what happens next?
Yeah, what happens next? So that was around, let's see. Well, I started that coaching program around the time I quit my job, right? So I learned to be a coach through them, and there were other people who trained me. And so you learn to teach ohming, but you also learn life coaching skills. So I was learning the whole thing at once in this year-long program.
So you use that as part of you were coaching.
Yeah, but the coaching was more life coaching, verbal communication. I often didn't talk about ohming with my clients. Often it wasn't relevant. We were talking about their careers or just didn't need to bring it in. Other clients I did.
Yeah.
So I left my job. I was had my own independent coaching practice. From that point on, I was integrating a lot. That was a lot that I was learning. So I was doing some sitting meditation. I was still ohming. I was coaching. I think that's when business started to become part of my spiritual practice, actually.
Yes.
Where I was trying to do business and had a lot of arrogance, like, oh, I was this hotshot innovation consultant for big companies, so I should know how to, get a coaching client or build my mailing list. And what I found is that the transformation industry was so different. And when what I was selling is my own service from the heart, it was so much more vulnerable. I was selling $100,000 projects for our company, no problem. But when it came to selling my own services, it was a whole new beast. So had a real journey of hiring some really terrible business coaches, people who taught, essentially old school sales cloaked in spiritual language, and found myself, actually hurting some people, running some sort of sales scripts on people, just trying to make my life work. Right. And doing the best I could, but doing these really inauthentic sales processes.
Yes.
And then from there, meeting one of my early business mentors, Mark Silver, who I still adore. I love the work he does at Heart of Business. And he really showed me that business can be spiritual. He has a Sufi background.
Oh, nice.
And I love what he does. It's weird. He'll do sort of Sufi chanting. We'll have spiritual development days, and chanting and sort of heart guidance. And then next call is talking about sacred selling.
Yeah.
So it was amazing. I was just so excited by that, and finding that I could finally integrate my sense of ethics and spirituality with the way I was doing business. And that became the thread that's turned into my business now, 4 or 5 years later, where I'm teaching, like, how do you, soul and strategy, how do you stay connected to your soul and your heart sense of what's right and what's wrong, and, truly, like, what do you want for the world? And then how do you integrate all of your business practices, your curriculum, your marketing, your selling with who you are and who you want to be.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So that business thread has been really profound. And I also love that business is at the confluence of so many other taboos. We already talked about sexuality being that sort of first big taboo I confronted. In business, you have money, you have selling, like somehow all that shadow has to be integrated into, shadow and light coming together and into business.
Yeah, I've done so much work as a coach and for so many years, for decades, but as trying to get it had to be of service. And that meant no money. And right. And so to really start to undo that piece of it's actually of service to people to pay me, both for my own livelihood as well as for their level of commitment. Like, energy is money, right? But I don't want to be the vulture, right? The vulture, this like conniving person who's trying to get you to come over here, and and so it's because our society is so wonky around money and so not balanced, to learn how to get integrated spiritually with money, with the work is such a hard integration. And I hear that struggle for you.
It's so, I'm glad you brought that up. It's so important.
Yeah.
The number of spiritual teachers and spiritual people being martyrs, and then not being able to pay rent, or they're desperate, or they get resentful then because, the clients are sucking them dry and they're enabling it, then blame their clients. It's painful.
And to really own that, like it's important for boundaries are that's what it is, right? It's the boundaries, and I was not taught boundaries, and I was not taught that this is livelihood and that it's good for both parties to have that exchange and to really hold that. And so to go into these calls for me to like have this, I need to pay the rent, right? But also of you're either supposed to be with me or you're not. And so I get to, when I have that experience fear, right? It doesn't matter what the fear is about, to come back and get spiritual and centered, right? So that I can be present to see if we're supposed to work together.
Yeah.
It's a practice on steroids, right? It's a spiritual.
Yeah. And money isn't simple. Like I'm still figuring out so much around money, and it doesn't get simpler. Right. One of my mentors and friends, Michael Curtis, talks about the martyr mercenary spectrum. Where on one side we have what we talked about, right? This spiritual martyrs. Can't charge for it. I got to give it away. It comes from God, right? Yeah. Okay. But you need to pay the bills. And then on the other side, mercenaries, who are there plenty of out there.
Yeah.
It's all about you and your conversion rates and getting paid. Right. And then in the middle, like, what is that balance between where you're in your magnificence? That's how Michael talks about it. And, that can shift in different phases of our life. I've charged more, I've charged less. There's this ongoing dance of money and what feels right. And also, as my awareness is expanded around social justice issues and privilege issues, that's made money more complicated, not less, right? Of how I want to, use my rates and develop pricing systems that aren't necessarily fixed, but depend more on different social factors that are coming together. So my heart goes out to everyone who's struggling with money. It's so real. It's so real. And we're in such a transitional time, right? Capitalism is, I don't know how long it'll be around. It feels like we're in this awkward space between capitalism and what's next. And we're figuring it out together.
So what I hear, and please correct me if this is how I hear what your story is it's, you did what you were supposed to do, right? Which is valedictorian, Stanford. I mean, what a great business card, right? You work at Stanford, you got a Stanford education, and you do all of these things. And I bet you were making pretty good money at your design job.
Yeah.
And then to have, you hit a depression, and then to start to feed the part of you that is not being fed. And then you have what it sounds like to me systematically went into each area of your life that doesn't have a spiritual voice.
Yeah.
And entered into that. Is that, I mean, because now the money, work, juggle where, it's a spiritual solution, but how it looks day to day, and then to add it to, social justice.
Yeah. And there's more. I don't know. I mean, I have to share at least a little bit about these two areas, because that's not it. Like, I guess my spiritual path is more like this voracious curiosity. How can we include everything in life? Like, to me, spirituality is almost not a thing. It's like spirituality is a connection to all that is. Because I'm not religious in that way, and I don't have one lineage that I've come from. To me, spirituality is like, how can we live in that sense of oneness? So I'm sort of like a heat-seeking missile for anything that feels separate from. My sexuality is not, sexuality or money. Right? So anything that I'm pushing away is like a sign that that's the next place for me to look at, and and learn, grow and learn in with my spiritual practice.
Yeah, which is a a Buddhist idea of equanimity, right? You're neither seeking nor pushing away. And so it's a great barometer, right, for where you're out of alignment and how to get back in alignment.
Totally. It reminds me of, I'm going to butcher this, but some Tibetan Buddhist phrase or a prayer is something like, God grant me the appropriate challenges. Like, please may my life not be too easy, right? or so hard that I go into panic and can't learn.
The courage of that prayer is not what I'm willing to do. It's not what I'm willing to do.
I think that's been my prayer, either consciously or unconsciously. It's like, okay, what's the next thing? Next thing, hopefully, that I can handle, with some mess, but some grace through it.
It is. So we're running out of time, and I just want to say thank you for being honest and being vulnerable and being transparent in your personal journey. And it's so important for me personally to hear everyone's journey and to find where I am different, where I am same, where I can learn, and how that it's profound for me, and it feels like you just really opened up to me, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for making a safe space to share. I think part of why I said yes to this is I haven't been interviewed about my spirituality before. This is a first.
Right?
I've been interviewed about business and purpose and all these other things, but this is like this is the vulnerable, real question. Like, what's your journey really?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, and it is a conversation that I have in my day-to-day life, and I just believe that it's important. And so I am honored by all of the people that are excited about it and want to come talk to me about it and share their personal journey, because someone out there is going to hear something in what you have to say and say, me too. Yes, that. You know, and then you get to light it up, right? Light up the next person and make their journey a little bit easier, because maybe they can do it too. And that's the work. Like, that's the service.
Yeah.
So
that feels like a good place to pause it. We might have to do a part 2.
Oh, yes.
Because we got to 2014 or so.
Okay, well, we'll do a so there will be a part 2 to hear about I don't know if there's an end.
We'll give a teaser. Well, there's definitely no end, but we'll talk about psychedelics, social justice, and leaving the Bay Area, which is all in maybe relationship, a little more on relationship than leaving the Bay Area, which is all in process. So thank God I don't need to go there today.
That's
but
okay.
There's more.
Yeah, well, then we will have you.
There's more. You know, we're books being written.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we'll have a part 2.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.